Hi, I'm Amy Ketchum,
And I'm Amy Casio,
and you're listening to the Double A Horror Highway. And today we're going to talk about Summer of '84.
which is a Canadian horror film that came out in 2018. If you're not familiar with this movie, or if you need a refresher, here is the plot summary. Here we go. In the summer of 1984, the small seaside town of Cape May, Oregon is plagued by the Cape May Slayer, who is a serial killer that has been responsible for the disappearances of 13 teenage boys in the county over the last decade. The movie follows a group of teenagers who suspect their police officer neighbor Wayne Mackey is the killer as they spend the summer spying on him. They document his routine and find many suspicious activities. They eventually discover the blood-stained shirt of a missing boy in his shed and present it to their parents, who are outraged and don't believe them. The parents demand they stop investigating and force them to apologize to the police officer. They secretly continue to investigate and eventually break into his house when he's not home and record what they see with the video camera. They explore a locked room in the basement and find a missing boy's desiccated corpse in the bathtub, along with a still living recent abductee. They show the footage to the police department, who issues an APB on Mackey. Later that night, Mackey abducts two of the boys and releases them into the woods to play a game of manhunt, where he chases them down, kills one of them, corners the other, but decides to let him go as part of a sick game to force the boy to live a life of paranoia and fear over his eventual return. The movie ends with the killer still at large and a looming sense of dread and anxiety. So, Amy Ketchum, how did you discover this movie? Do you remember?
I think it was just completely random. I think I was just out exploring last year looking for new horror movies and stumbled upon it. I don't think I saw any trailers or commercials or anything that alerted me to it. And it was just the cover of it. The Summer of '84 has a picture of a milk carton kid. And I thought, well, that looks like a lot of fun. So I thought I'd give it a whirl. And it instantly became one of my new favorites.
I had the exact same story. I was just searching for something to watch, and the cover appealed to me. And I love horror. I love the 80s. It sounded interesting, and I put it on, and I loved it. So this movie was written by Matt Leslie and Stephen J. Smith, and it was directed by the trio known as RKSS, which stands for Roadkill Superstar, which is a filmmaking collective of Anouk Wissel, Francois Simard, and Joanne Cara Wissel. They've been making movies, they've been working together for like 16 years, and they also did the 80s themed movie Turbo Kid, which I had never heard of until researching this movie, and I feel like I definitely have to watch that movie now. So this movie was influenced by The Burbs, Goonies, Stand By Me, movies like that. It's a serial killer movie, so they did do some research with Ted Bundy. You can see that the killer is driving the same car as Ted Bundy, the yellow bug.
Ah, I didn't catch that.
So
Nice.
the directors discovered the script in 2015 before Stranger Things came out, and they weren't really sure if people would be into the 80s vibe at that time. But a year later, that's when Stranger Things came out, and then the movie was very quickly and easily greenlit because of the huge success of Stranger Things. And they said the script really spoke to them because of the familiarity of growing up in the mid 80s in the suburbs, where the feelings of safety started to fade away. There was this shift that started to happen. There were more abductions. People started to become paranoid and locking their doors when they hadn't been locking them before. This is the theme that is the core of the story and why it's set in the 80s, to sort of explore this shift that was happening. They tried really hard to make it very authentic to 1984. And so, Ketchum, I know that you have a thing with movies that are set in years and they try to stick to that year. Do you feel like it was do you feel like it was authentic for you?
No.
No?
It was not authentic enough for me. But it was very good. It was pretty close. I wasn't happy with their clothing. There was a lot of '90s clothing they were trying to pass as '84. So, but I did like it. I thought it was pretty good compared to other stuff that is set in the '80s. I thought they did very well.
I mean, I felt it was very authentic.
Yeah, I did too.
I feel like it wasn't too over the top with the 80s. When this movie came out, it was a post-Stranger Things world, so it got compared to that a lot. But, Stranger Things did not invent the 80s, but they did popularize it, and they created this trend of rehashing the 80s and all of this 80s nostalgia. But this movie is grounded in reality and not the supernatural, where Stranger Things is jam-packed with like every pop culture reference that they can fit into a frame. And this movie is more subtle, so it's got the 80s imagery, but they aren't going overboard with the pop culture references. They wanted to make it more authentic. They said that kids did not actually have that many pop culture references crammed into their rooms. It was much more subtle. You know, you would have a few things, but not everything that you could possibly think of. These are kids. They have an allowance. They don't have endless amounts of money to get everything that's out there. So if we talk about 1984 itself, would you like to tell us about 1984?
Why, yes, I would love to tell you about 1984. So, 1984 was a magical, explosive year of creativity. And we have to keep in mind that Reagan had already completed a whole term and he had just been reelected. So the country was on an economic rise. When he first went into office, we were in a recession. So life was good. Well, at least for media and creation. I mean, there was still war. There was the Cold War going on. TV was good. Film was awesome. The music hits were diverse and plenty. And toys were more creative than we'd ever seen before. And even our favorite food brands started popping out new flavors and interesting products after that steady economic boost. So for $2.50, you could go to the theater to watch a movie, and some of the movies that came out that year were Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Gremlins, Karate Kid, Ghostbusters, Terminator, Nightmare on Elm Street, Beverly Hills Cop, The Never-Ending Story, 16 Candles, and Amadeus. So, I mean, if you look at that list and just pull out one of those movies, I mean, those are amazing movies. For all of those to come out in one year is crazy. Mm-hmm. And one of the greatest commercials they say ever made was a commercial that Apple released for the Macintosh computer, and it was actually called 1984, and it aired during the Super Bowl and the Olympics. So that kicked off the sale of the first personal computers, and they were $2,500, if you can imagine.
That's insane.
Sally Ride became the first American woman in space aboard the Challenger. Margaret Thatcher, she won her election by a landslide as prime minister, and Reagan took his second term. He won 49 out of 50 states' votes, so Republicans and Democrats alike were pleased with him. Michael Jackson's Thriller was the biggest pop album ever, selling 37 million copies, collecting 8 Grammy Awards, which put it in the Guinness Book of World Records. And Sony released the first CD player. And probably the most important thing out of this whole list is that DNA profiling was introduced. So the forensic scientists could start collecting genetic information. So that's my look back on 1984.
One thing I also noted about 1984, because they do make like a joke about catching AIDS, is that like that was going on. And I think that was probably the time period where they didn't know much about it and how it was being spread. So it kind of, they have that kind of fear.
Right, yeah.
They don't really know what's going on.
Yeah, AIDS was actually first called AIDS in 83. So there would have been quite the fear in 84, I'm sure.
Yeah. So as far as the impact of this movie when it came out, they showed it at Sundance and it created a buzz there. So it started to get there was some talk about it. For me, when I saw it, I was really, really disturbed by this movie. I felt like it's one of those movies that had a very long-lasting effect. Like, long after I finished the movie, I would still have the ending scenes, like, burned into my brain. Like, the boy who's chained up and the body in the bathtub. And just the fact that this is not a happy ending. Like, I really appreciate that, because I do like it when we don't have these happy Hollywood endings. It's a little depressing, but I think it's also really interesting to do that. And you know, I rewatched it for this podcast, so it was extra creepy, like knowing for sure that Mackie is the killer, and just like watching the way that there's like a scene where he's sitting on the lawn drinking a beer watching the kids, and it looks like he's thinking some really creepy, horrible things. So it just becomes much more meaningful when you know that he is the killer.
Yeah. My second watch, which was in preparation for this podcast, I felt like I was catching new things, since I knew he was the killer. When I first watched it last fall, I guess, it made quite the impression on me, and I loved it. I mean, I was probably smiling and excited when it was over, because I just felt like I hadn't seen any good new horror movies for a long time at that point. And I actually had seen a couple of other ones that starred teens. And this movie, though, when I watched it, I just felt like here's a movie that did it right. And I
Yeah.
was really impressed with the soundtrack throughout it. And
Yeah, the soundtrack is amazing.
yeah, and it just has a nice everything just works together so nice. It's like you feel a sense of relief and security a couple of times in the movie, and then they flip it on you. And I think that
Mhm.
that really is good in a thriller. That makes a really good thriller.
Mhm.
So I was really impressed. I enjoy thrillers. I also enjoy people spying on people and seeing things and nobody believing them and they have to prove it. Like, that always gets me.
I feel like it's kind of going back to Rear Window
Yes,
with the
definitely.
spying.
My favorite. Yeah, so Rear Window, Fright Night, Silver Bullet, more recently Disturbia. Those are my kind of movie. I love them all.
So, as far as the music, it's by a duo. I believe they're a duo called Les Matos. I don't know how to say that. I could be butchering it. But again, this is exactly my kind of music. The 80s synth sound. It's fantastic. To me, it sounds like it was ripped right out of Risky Business.
Yeah,
Have you
yes,
and
exactly.
Tangerine Dream? It really reminds me of Love on a Real Train because that's like one of my favorite songs ever, ever, ever. I think that that's probably one of the greatest 80s synth soundtracks to ever be created is Risky
Yeah,
Business
definitely.
and the Tangerine Dream songs. I mean, there's so many times I listened to that song, Love on a Real Train. I was just obsessed with it for a period of time. So it does remind me of that. So there's a couple songs. Uh, Everything is on Bandcamp. Like if you go to their Bandcamp, you could just listen to everything, stream it. There's like 45 tracks. It's crazy. Manhunt. That's the one that really reminds me of Tangerine Dream. It's great. It's fantastic.
Well, as I mentioned to you earlier, in my past life of doing sound for theater, I prefer something that's more like a score, that really follows the mood. And I felt like this, they just hit play on a CD. That's how I felt. So that kind of lacked for me. Like, I love the music, I loved every
Mhm.
second of it, but I would have preferred if they really made it into a score format so that we could have a lot of mood changes and not just pretty much random music playing.
I don't feel that way, but yeah, I mean, I like it. I thought it worked for me anyway.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely galaxies away from what other people have tried to do similarly. It's very, very good
Hmm.
music.
Yeah. Do you have anything to say about the serial killer aspect?
Okay, so our monster is human, and everything's based on human behavior in this movie, which actually to me is scarier than having a big bad science fiction type of monster. Humans are so unpredictable. So to me, the general rule of this type of monster is just leave me alone and I won't kill you.
Mm-hmm.
And he can't leave him alone. He can't stop thinking about him, as he says at the end. He's going to let him think about him for the rest of his life, since he thinks about him so much already. This kid can't stop
Mm-hmm.
thinking about him. He's got him under the microscope and he can't let go. So, yeah, that is the rule. Leave him alone and he won't kill you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it does feel like he would have been safe if he just would have left him alone, that he didn't actually intend on coming after this kid.
Yeah, I don't think he would because his father is a newscaster. Like, I felt like that
Mm-hmm.
played into it. Like, he doesn't want to end up on the news, he doesn't want any attention. And
Yeah.
especially once this kid has accused him, the last thing he can do is take that kid and throw him in the basement. And so, of course, in our story, they immediately show that he's captured the the Cape May Slayer so that everyone can forget about him. And I think that's when there's a shift that he can actually now kidnap this child and throw him in the basement if he wants to, because he's
Mm-hmm.
not under the microscope anymore.
Yeah.
Well, I did a little bit of research of serial killers in 1984 just to see what would pop up, and I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
getting much. I just found the beauty queen serial killer who apparently traveled across America for 6 weeks and killed a handful of women.
Well, I mean, there was a lot of serial killers in the 70s, though. That's an insane time period for serial killers.
Yeah.
And the directors do mention John Wayne Gacy because he was happening during the 70s. And so, as most of us probably know, he dressed up like a clown. He would capture little boys, do whatever he did to them and then kill them. And so, yeah, the directors kind of referenced this movie with John Wayne Gacy and how there's something very scary about a person who can seem very normal, but they're just really pure evil. They're hiding in plain sight,
Right.
basically. And that's what our killer is doing. He's hiding in plain sight. Yeah, I mean, this is the suburban life at the time. People move to these areas thinking that they're safe. You know, this is a time when there's no internet, there's no streaming with the TV, there's no YouTube. This is when kids were playing outside a lot more, I think. I mean, this is like go out and play, come home when the lights come on, see you later. Did you have that kind of life? Like what kind of
Yes.
childhood did you have?
Well, we did not have suburbs. Our town does not have suburbs. They still don't have suburbs. It's just an old town, and that's exactly how it was. You know, go do what you want, come back later. There were no phones, no cell phones. We did have walkie talkies. Yeah, there's this movie holds some great nostalgia for me as far as what we would do in the summer, which was very similar, except we never caught anybody doing anything crazy, but we always were trying
Mm-hmm.
to spy on everybody and figure everything out. So I think that was probably really common in the 80s, because what else are you supposed to do with your lives outside in the sun? Toss a ball all
Yeah,
day?
yeah, I mean, I lived in a small town also, and that was the thing you did. You just went outside and you played with the neighborhood kids. So I just remember just hanging out with like groups of neighborhood kids. And I just feel like that, I mean, I don't have kids, but I feel like that doesn't really happen now.
Right.
And it has been happening for a while.
Right. And where I lived, it was common to not have air conditioning. So I think that was another part of it too. I think now kids stay inside because they're nice and cold. They don't want to go out into the heat.
Mm.
But back then it was like we were always outside, in the pool and the sprinkler,
Yeah. The
slip
slip
and
and
slide.
slide. But maybe that was 90s. I don't know if that was 80s, but
No, that was 80s, yeah.
90s for sure.
Yeah,
Really?
yeah. I
Okay.
definitely wanted one. Here was our version of the slip and slide. We would take the pool cover off, which is covered in slimy algae, and we would
Ew.
spread it out on the driveway to clean it, right? We'd have to clean it with soap and scrub it, and that was our slip and
Hmm.
slide. We would slide down that as we cleaned it.
So in this movie, they talk about keeping their doors unlocked. Did you grow up in a household with unlocked doors?
No, we
Because
always
I
we
I
always
did
locked our
not.
doors. Yeah, yeah, we always locked them. Yeah, I mean, I spent some time in Canada, whenever 20 years ago, and I remember nobody locked their doors then. And I've watched some other specials about Canada where they talk about it, about that there's no reason to lock your door there. So I wonder if that kind of plays into this as well, since the creators are from Vancouver.
Yeah, that's just weird to me. But that's this movie is that period where the shift happened.
Right.
People were trusting their neighbors. They were keeping their doors unlocked, and then suddenly it's like, not really a good idea to keep your doors unlocked anymore. People started to get scared. That safety disappeared. And they say this is the end of the American dream. And I noticed one of the characters, the babysitter, she comes over to talk to Davy, the main character, and she's talking about getting that her parents are getting a divorce. So I feel like that was probably another thing that was starting to happen in the 80s where like divorce was becoming more common. And there's also the thing where she was the babysitter and she's not that much older than him. So that was another thing happening is like kids babysitting kids. I mean, I specifically remember being like 11 or 12 and being told to babysit my cousin who was just a few years old while my aunt and uncle went out to do whatever. And I'm like 12, I don't want to babysit, but like for some reason kids were trusted to babysit other kids in the 80s. And so that whole part with her, that part is a little bit weird to me because I think he's supposed to be like 15 and she's like 18 because she's talking about going off to college.
Right.
So that seemed a little bit weird to me that she seemed to be like interested in a 15-year-old that she used to babysit.
Right.
That was just, I don't know. Maybe that's just some kind of fantasy that they wanted to make come true.
Right. Yeah, maybe that was just his perception of what was happening.
Yeah. So I like the twist in this movie where like the movie is, at first for me when I watched it, I thought that Mackie was definitely the killer. But then as you get through the movie, they start to lead you to believe that it's not really him. it's somebody else, but then it actually is him, and so I liked that sort of the twist.
Yeah, we saw that a lot in 80s horror. Like that always works. The other way that works is where 100% it is the person, but the parents don't believe them no matter what. Like that always works as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it almost seems like we don't even need to know if it truly is them or not. Like it's going to work one way or the other in this type of story. Once they know
Yeah.
who they think it is, it's going to be that person. But it got
Mm-hmm.
me too, and I did like that as well. It was a nice twist.
Yeah.
So before the ending, a part that kind of got to me, and I don't know if it was a good thing or not, like I don't know if it was supposed to get to me like this, was after they are in the basement and they make their video and they take it to the police station. They create this huge window of time for Mackie to leave, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, obviously, he's going to return to his house. He's going to tell that somebody's been in there. And even if he doesn't, he's going to know that the boy in the basement's missing. So, therefore, he's going to get out of there. So, that kind of bothered me. It made me very uneasy that they're just sitting there watching this videotape with the cops. It's like, no, just tell them to come over right now. You can show them the tape later,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And then that they use that as a leverage to create a sense of security, right? When the two boys are back in Davy's room getting ready to go to bed. And it kind of, even the second time I watched it, it kind of left me hanging like, oh, wait, he's out there. You know, they
Yeah.
didn't just go to his house and arrest him. He's out there somewhere. So it's like you feel security in his room with his parents, you know, and his friends
Mm-hmm.
staying over because it's the more secure place to stay. And then we learn that no, you are not safe in your own bedroom. That was creepy.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that brings us to the ending is like it kind of it felt like there were two or three endings. Like the ending was broken up into three sections, I
Right.
guess.
Yeah.
You have the fake out ending where like you mentioned everything that you just mentioned. I mean that if we do discuss the ending itself, I mean that whole ending it is burned into my brain like I said before. When they are going through the house, they're breaking into that locked basement door and you're not sure what you're going to see, but you know that it's not going to be good. Then you see that trophy room, like what I like to call the trophy room of pictures of all of his victims. And then you cut to the bathtub of the decomposing body and the kid who's tied up. And yeah, it's just burned into my brain. And like you mentioned, that's the part when they show everything to the cops, and that's when the movie fades to black. You think it's over. It could be over. It could be the happy ending. But then it doesn't end. And this is even more disturbing. You know, he was hiding in the attic all along, I guess because nobody locks their doors.
Right.
But he comes down from the attic slowly. You just see his legs. You don't know who it actually is yet. Then they show his face. It's now after midnight. Everybody's asleep. And he chloroforms them. And they wake up in a car where they're tied up. And they're playing this. He wants to play this sick game of Manhunt, which is the game they've been playing all throughout the movie. Which, if anybody doesn't know what Manhunt is, because I wasn't exactly clear, is it's just like hide and seek. You try to find your friends. So that part, that's also horrifying. It's like he took them to some kind of island or something, like something that's surrounded by water. My notes say it was an island of dead bodies because they're tripping over bodies. He's screaming at them with a megaphone in the forest. It's just it's twisted and it stuck with me. And he's just chasing them, and then he eventually gets one of them, and he slits his throat, and then he corners the other kid and he's telling him, "This is all your fault. It's your fault that I'm chasing you, that I'm killing your friend. You spent so much time thinking about me that I want you to keep thinking about me. I want you to imagine what I'm going to do when I come back to you. And I will come back to you. I want you to spend your life looking over your shoulder and wonder every day if that's the day I am going to come back for you. And one day you will be right." And that's and that's kind of, and that's where it ends the second time, and then we go back to Davy sobbing. This is where it's like the death of safety in the
Right.
suburbs. Anything could happen, you would never know. That's when he's riding his bike down the street, giving his speech. Anything could happen. You don't know what's happening behind closed doors. People aren't really letting you know who they really are,
Right.
and it ends with serial killers. Even serial killers live next door to somebody.
Right, which is how it began.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any specific thoughts about the ending?
Well,
Any deeper thoughts?
there was one little detail that stood out because out of all the 80s, 90s horror, there are just a handful of things that really bother me. And one of them is from Pet Cemetery, where I believe it's the little child. I can't think of his name. I don't remember the character's name.
I think it was Gabe. Maybe it was something like Gabe.
Yeah, the deceased child.
It's been a while. Yeah.
And Fred Gwynn, Herman Munster, he bends over to look underneath the bed, and the child pops out with a straight razor and he slices his Achilles tendon. And that has just always stuck with me. Like, it just does so, ugh. And that's exactly what he does to Davy. Davy's peeking around the tree and he comes up and slices his Achilles tendon. So to me, that was like some type of Stephen King nod. But yeah, that to me, that was the creepiest part of the ending, which I know is really silly out of all the stuff that happens.
I mean, I hate that. I hate when I see that in movies. It feels like one of the most painful things you can have done to you.
Right.
Like the most painful way to try to make somebody stop running.
Right.
Is to just ew.
Right. It's such a sensitive spot. So it always gets me. Anytime there's anything to do with that area of your ankle.
Yeah. So do you feel like there should be a sequel to this? How do you feel about that?
I would love a sequel. I would love to see
really?
them go on and use their skills to find somebody else. I don't want to see anything about Mackie. Yeah. You know, maybe there could be a movie of futuristic, 20 years down the road where Mackie comes back. But I think there could be a sequel of just spying on your neighbors and seeing some more crazy stuff and nobody believing them because, what's the odds that you catch a criminal twice?
Well, the directors say that they feel like a sequel would ruin the ending of the first one. They said that they really enjoyed the whole thing that I forgot to mention was that they picked this movie because they were so excited about the ending because it's not your typical ending. It's not a happy ending. So they feel like if they did do a sequel, it would have to be very, very special. It would have to be a top-notch script, something that wouldn't ruin the way that the first one ended and that doesn't take away from the first movie. And so I kind of agree with that, where if there is a sequel, it would kind of take away from that bleak ending that we get because it just kind of leaves you with this sense of dread, like we don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
That kid is out there right now waiting for Mackie to come to him. So...
Yeah, I was reading a bunch of different blog posts, and one word stood out that someone described it as inspired, an inspired ending. And I thought that is exactly what it is. It's a very unique ending. Yeah, it's special in its creepy way.
Yeah.
Do you recall ever just sitting down eating only Kraft macaroni and cheese for dinner?
I do. That did happen. Why?
What I don't understand is the parents eating it. I understand a child just wanting Kraft macaroni and cheese or being happy with that, but for the parents to sit down and only eat that for their dinner, that was kind of strange to me.
Was that in the movie and I missed it?
Yeah, they're sitting down. They have TV trays, Kraft macaroni and cheese, and milk, and they're watching TV. That was towards the beginning.
The TV trays.
Yeah. So I felt that, the first time he invites him in to help him move something was because he knew that he was already onto him, or he knew that he's such an inquisitive child that he's going to be onto him. So I felt like he was showing him his house. He was showing him the basement. He intentionally took him into the dark room so that this kid would be satisfied and would, stop focusing on him. And then later on, I felt that when he offered him the walkie talkies, that is when he was going to kill him. Because he was enticing him with something that he would absolutely want, that would take him into that house again.
Mm-hmm.
So those were my two favorite moments, I think.
I kind of, I can totally agree with that, but I was also kind of wondering if maybe he was doing it as another part of his sick, twisted game in his head. Because, there's this this idea that serial killers like where they want to because they can't get attention for their work as they call it. And so this would be a way for him to get attention for the work that he's doing, that he
Right.
thinks he's doing, is to take on this to just kind of take on this kid
It was a
to work with
challenge.
him.
Yeah.
Yeah, work with him, tell him the details of what's going on. He can hear if the kid's impressed by like the details of the murders or the kidnappings and just go down that road with it and just he would get some kind of twisted satisfaction out of getting the reactions from this kid every time he updates him with the horrors that are happening.
Right.
Yeah, that's the way that I kind of thought about it too.
Right. Yeah. I think he saw himself in the kid, that the kid could make a good cop or detective or whatever.
Yeah.
So he had an interest in him in a way, but the kid was too nosy. He was getting too close.
Yeah.
And there was that one scene where Mackie is trying to threaten him, where he's in the window looking back at him with the binoculars. And then he
Oh, yeah.
puts his walkie-talkie in the window, like, I know what you're up to. I've got your walkie-talkie.
So that makes me wonder, do you think that he was listening to the kids throughout the movie?
I wouldn't think so, because you have to hold down, the button on the walkie-talkie for it to pick up. But I don't know. I mean, if he had high-tech equipment in his house, he could have been picking up that signal, because I had similar walkie-talkies as a child, and the signal would actually come over the TV. So that was one of
Really?
my tricks. I would turn the TV on a fuzzy channel, and I would go somewhere else, and I would talk and try to scare people as they walked by the TV. So yeah, I mean, he could have been picking up their conversation somehow. That's an interesting twist.
I feel like I missed out because I think I did have walkie-talkies, but I could never get them to work right, or it felt like it was not very exciting. But I didn't know you could do all that.
Yeah, they don't reach very far, unless you have like really nice ones. But mine were Knight Rider, so they were the equivalent of their GI Joe. So really, if someone's inside a house and somebody's outside the house, they're not really going to work.
So there was a lot of spying with binoculars. So did you do that as a child? Were you spying with binoculars at people?
Yes, definitely.
You were?
Yes. Yes, I had binoculars. Yeah, we had all kinds of fun stuff, trying to be PIs in our childhood imagination. So binoculars was on the list. Listening equipment. I can't think of what it was called. It was something that would, like you could hold it up to the wall. It was like, what was it called? I want to say bionic ear, but I don't know. Like you could hear, like you could turn up really, really loud and you could hear somebody whispering in the next room. But the downside is anything close. If there was a little tiny noise really close to you, you're just deaf. It would be so loud.
So didn't you say you had like a little bit of a story where you had a friend where you were... What did you do? Somehow you got locked out of your house from spying.
We were in third grade, and we had created our PI firm called MDY, which was just basically my father's old briefcase and a bunch of our PI toys. And we were trying to solve crime in the neighborhood in our imagination. Anyhow, one night we decided that we were going to go spy on somebody and do a real stakeout at night, see, what it's like outside, I guess, at night. And we climbed out of her dining room window, probably around 2 a.m., and it was so terrifying outside because there were no cars. And then when a car would drive by, we would run and hide and that type of stuff. But when we got back to the house, we couldn't get back in the window. So I'm pretty for sure she must have pushed me in, and she was a gymnast, and, she just flexed herself in some magical gymnast way and got back in the window. But the funny part was the next day, we actually broke something on the window. We didn't know that, And so the next day her mother was over inspecting the window to see what was broke and why. And I guess she thought there was a prowler trying to break in, and she made sure to not tell us anything because, again, this is the 80s. That would have been about 87. So there was a lot of stranger danger stuff in the news all the time. And kids that were just scared for absolutely no reason. Ridiculous.
Well, that could bring us to the milk cartons. So you said you did because the poster of this movie, one of the posters is a milk carton with the missing kid on it. And I grew up knowing that to be a thing, but I don't know that I actually ever saw a milk carton with a kid on it. Did you actually see that?
Yeah.
You did?
Yeah.
You saw missing kids on milk cartons?
Yeah, so at our school, when we had milk break, there were missing kids on the milk cartons. There was also Safety Pup, and Safety Pup would give you little pieces of advice on how to be safe or how to report suspicious stuff. But yeah, it was definitely on our milk cartons. And 1984 was the year of all of this stuff. So it was the year that the milk cartons really boomed. And one thing I remember, which has always been puzzling to me, was that in kindergarten in 1984, a group of people came and took our fingerprints. And so as I was preparing for today, I learned that civic groups in 1984 were visiting schools, taking fingerprints so that your parents would have them. So if you were ever abducted, you could give the police station your fingerprints, which is interesting and proactive, but it's also pretty creepy.
Yeah. I did not have that experience, but that is kind of creepy.
Yeah.
Because you said it wasn't really anybody official.
Right.
It was just a group of people who decided, let's take these kids' fingerprints.
Right, and then they give them to you. They didn't keep them. But it's been puzzling me my whole life because I thought it was the police, and I wondered why. Why would you come and take a whole class? But now I know. So as far as the milk cartons, the interesting story behind that is that there were a handful of high interest cases of some stranger abductions that had happened. And, I think it started in 1979 was the first milk carton, but it didn't catch on until 84. So in 1984, there were several national child safety type groups that were created. And it was, basically a whole coalition of a variety of ways to keep your children safe. And what started this was some high-profile stranger abduction cases. And they wanted to bring attention to those cases. And I believe it started in Iowa, the very first milk carton in 1984, that took us from not really looking into child abduction on a regular basis to that's all we were thinking about, to the point of children becoming terrified. Mm-hmm. So what really was going on was that there was, let's say, 800,000 abductions annually. And they actually inflated the number at the time and said there were 2 million to get attention so they could do their milk cartons and other things they wanted to do. But the reality was that out of those 800,000, only about 115 are true stranger abductions. The rest are just custodial battles that have to be reported. So kids really were not being abducted on every corner like we were being taught in the early 80s. So it's actually pretty ridiculous. I'm all for anything to get children's faces out there that are missing, but it went crazy. And
yeah.
I believe they said there were 700 dairy factories that were producing these milk cartons. It was the little ones and the big ones. So most people were probably seeing it at some point in their life, but I guess you didn't actually see any in person that you can recall.
I don't think so, but I knew that it was always a thing, and there were always jokes about it, on TV.
Right, and I think part of the joking was that, it had gotten out that it's really a teeny tiny small percentile of abductions that were serious, cases. Mm-hmm. And it spread far and wide. It was on pizza boxes.
Ooh, I want pizza.
Grocery bags, paper and plastic grocery bags, junk mail, envelopes, phone directories. They said that even semi-trucks would drive by you on the highway with a missing child on the side. And part of the speculation was that some of these companies were receiving different kinds of tax breaks.
I was about to say, that seems like somebody was getting paid somewhere.
Right. Yeah.
To make it, that big of a deal.
Right. So it led to all kinds of fabulous things, though. I mean, they created directories of missing children that they presented to cops and the FBI. There was something called life tags that were kind of like dog tags that children could wear of their ID information. I actually had a similar tag on my shoe, which is really dorky, I know, but I thought it was so cool when I was in kindergarten.
So was it on the inside of your shoe?
No, it hung on my shoestring.
Oh, God.
How dorky is that?
Wow.
But I loved it. So this whole thing with the milk cartons was actually still out there until 1996, and then it was replaced by the Amber Alert.
Mm-hmm.
Even cartoons were getting into it, like the Berenstain Bears. I remember they had an episode about stranger danger.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, it was all over the place. Just, use a safe word when you get picked up by a neighbor. Don't talk to strangers. Watch for white vans that might pull
Mm-hmm.
over to talk to you. All these different alerts, started happening. And I read that as far as the milk cartons, that two pediatricians had come forward to get rid of them because they said it was actually causing more damage than good. That, for 100 some kids missing per year, for the benefit of that what was happening was millions of children were actually being scared every single day, looking at milk cartons thinking, am I next?
Yeah, that's what I would think. Like, who wants to sit down as a kid at the breakfast table, you know, pour your morning cereal, pour your milk, and there's a missing kid?
Right.
That sounds frightening.
I think for me as a kid, I would look at them and I would think, have I seen this kid? And I would try to remember what they looked like in case I ever saw them.
Mm.
But as we know, the reality is that most of the children that are abducted, they might die within hours of being abducted.
Which all reminds me of the Jacob Wetterling case. Because this movie reminds me of that. He was a kid who got abducted in the 80s. I think it was later than 84, though. They couldn't find him until the killer was caught like a year or two ago because he confessed, and so it was finally closed. And it's a horrifying story. The mother of Jacob Wetterling, she went on to help create the sex offenders registry. So like that whole case, that's where that all came from.
That's
So
nice. Yeah, it's
yeah.
always a good payoff for the families of these children when they can actually do something like that, and have a
Mm-hmm.
positive effect.
Yeah. So on a more lighthearted note, I have a little fun fact here is that when the kids are in the arcade in the movie, you will see there's a game that's out of order in the background called Polybius. This is an urban legend that existed. This is based on an urban legend, basically. The legend goes that this is an arcade game that started to show up in the suburbs of Portland, and we know this movie takes place in Oregon. And so the game was allegedly part of a government run psychology experiment, and the gameplay supposedly produced intense psychoactive and addictive effects in the player.
Wow.
And they were and these the games were said to have been visited periodically by men in black for the purpose of data mining the machines and analyzing the effects. And then eventually all of the machines started to disappear from the market, and players supposedly suffered from unpleasant side effects like amnesia, insomnia, night terrors, hallucinations, and it's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. I've never heard
Men
of it.
in Men in Black.
I always love a good Men in Black story.
Yeah. So, what would you rate this movie?
Let's see. So our scale is 1 to 3.
Yeah, so the rating scale that I always use is 1 to 3, where 1 means that you either couldn't make it through the movie or you hate it. It's just 1 is bad, 2 is like medium, 3 is like it's really good. You're going to watch it forever, endlessly.
This is definitely a 3 for me. It was an instant classic, a new horror classic, and I will watch it over and over and over.
I feel the same. It's also a 3 for me, where I instantly loved it. I love the feel of it. It's not too over the top with the 80s. It's based in reality, so sometimes that can be even more scary than something supernatural. It's a serial killer. And so yes, I would watch this over and over again if I'm in that kind of mood, because it is very disturbing to me. This movie is really disturbing to me. I would definitely recommend it to people. I would sit down and watch it with people if somebody's like, "Oh, let's get together and watch something really creepy and horrifying." This is one of the movies that I would definitely recommend that the group watch.
Right, and as far as it being an 84 theme, I feel like just the overall theme of the movie was more 80s than how it all looked. Like they did a good job of it looking like 84, but that
Mm-hmm.
theme of, who done it and no one believing them, has been done so many times in the 80s. I feel like it just fits right in with all those classics. Like, I think it's right up there with them.
Yeah. Yeah, it fits in. So, do you have any awards to give this movie?
I only have one award, which was Best Soundtrack.
I also gave it an award for the best soundtrack. I did give it an award for two more awards, actually. I gave it an award for the twist of making me think that the neighbor is not the killer, but then it does turn out to be the killer. I mean, some people feel like they saw it coming from a mile away, but like for me, I don't know. For me, it worked. So I give them an award for that twist of making me feel like it wasn't him, but then it was actually him. And then I also gave it an award for disturbing me so much. Like I was very disturbed by everything that happened in that trophy room slash bathroom
Ew.
slash locked basement room, because that they get an award for disturbing me because it's really hard for me to feel disturbed by a movie anymore, by a horror movie.
Mm-hmm.
Like I just see so many things and it just, I guess you could say this gets an award for making a lasting impression on me. It just sticks with me.
Well, I think I've come up with a second award for myself, which is the trophies upstairs, the wall of pictures. That was creepy when he came in and said, "Oh, you've got such a big family." And then he looks at him later and realizes that it's all of these kids that are missing and he's on the wall. That was so creepy.
Yeah, totally disturbing. Take your award.
Take it and run. And that was the summer of 84. I'm Amy Ketchum.
And I'm Amy Casio.
And you've been listening to the AA Horror Highway. Tune in next week as we discuss The Final Girls, a meta-horror from 2015 starring Thaisa Formiga. Connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, or Patreon at AA Horror Highway. Find us on Twitter at Horror Highway, that's Horror HWY. Also, be sure to take a moment and rate and review us on iTunes. You can find all of our social media links and more by going to horrorhighway.com. That's horrorhwy.com.